really here to talk about protecting natural areas. We have Jackie Ho and Julie Boan, and they're both with Ontario Nature. And if you're interested in Ontario Nature, there is their website, so you can gain some more information. But kind of what we're trying to do is tie that into Wabakimi. And I want to just kind of bring some of the relationship between the Friends and Ontario Nature here. This is actually Ontario Nature's story map, showing some of the areas that they've already identified that they want to protect. And the circle here is for the Wabakimi area. And just to highlight the partnership that we have with Ontario Nature, one of the areas that we nominated was the Mystical River Valley. That's a huge area. And we've also have nominated an area at the south end of the Wabakimi complex, which is the Otter Creek drainage. And we asked that they include Survey Creek as part of the areas that they've already nominated for protection. And the reasoning behind the Survey Creek will be more apparent if you come to my presentation on the 27th of February, as I retrace EU's trip from 1784. But with that, we've also are going to have some discussions with Ontario Nature about the what used to be called the Armstrong Forest, but we've nominated some areas in that Crown land. I'm calling it the Campbell Triangle, the Dalton Block, and then the Doe Fawn Complex. And so we're going to have some conversations with Ontario Nature about trying to protect those areas. But with that said, I'm going to hit the stop share. And I'm going to turn this over to Jackie, and Jackie's going to introduce her cohort, and I'm going to let you have the program. So away you go, and thank you very much.
Thanks so much. Let me share my screen. Are we seeing that?
Yes.
Perfect. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having Julie and me. To start, I'm going to super quickly introduce Ontario Nature for people who may not be familiar with it. We are a provincial environmental charity with a mission to protect wild species and wild spaces through conservation, public engagement, and advocacy. So it's really great to be here. Today, I'm calling in from Toronto, which is within the Treaty 13 territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, as well as Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Huron-Wendat territory. But it's really great to have a chance to speak with everyone and to meet our nature network groups, even virtually. Today, I am here with Julie, who is our Boreal program manager. I will also let her introduce herself, but Julie has been with Ontario Nature for 20 years now, which is incredible, and she is our forestry and caribou expert. And the two of us are on the Protected Places campaign team, working on policy research and communications, and working with local groups like yours to hopefully move forward with protecting more natural areas in Ontario. Hey, Julie?
Sure, you want me to just jump in there? Yeah, I'll just add, I'm calling in from Thunder Bay tonight on the Robinson Superior Treaty area, and I run Ontario Nature's Northern Office, and I've done that for about 17 years. So most of the time I've been in Ontario Nature, and a lot of my work focuses on forestry certification. So I'm going to touch on a bit of that tonight. Protected areas. We run a fairly big outreach and education program out of Thunder Bay. At least before COVID, we connected with 1,500 to 2,000 people every summer in our love of nature work that we did in different communities. We do a fair amount of wildlife research over the years. Right now, our focus is on breeding birds. So we might touch on that tonight too, because we've just last year, we launched the Ontario Breeding Bird Atlas, the third one. And, trying to cobble that all together with our restrictions we're facing right now. But anyways, I'll just pass it back to Jackie, and there's a few things. Jackie's going to lead the presentation, but there's a few things I'll speak to tonight as well and be available for questions afterwards.
Thanks, Julie. So today's presentation is going to be giving some updates on our protected places work. It's a little bit all over the place in the sense that our campaign reaches across a lot of different areas, but I hope it will be interesting to all of you. So to start off with kind of a bigger picture overview, here is the context for the current targets around protected areas and biodiversity. So we just spent 10 years under the Convention on Biological Diversity targets, which included a target of protecting 17% of lands and waters by 2020. And this was a fairly well-known target that neither Ontario nor Canada reached, unfortunately. In Ontario, the needle didn't move very much, and we're still sitting at about 10.7% protected area in the province. But there's been more work done federally, and the federal government has committed to new targets at 25% of lands and waters protected by 2025 and 30% by 2030. And the international community is also discussing this in the post-2020 framework. These are, really big targets. For perspective, 1% in a protected area in Ontario is about 1 million hectares. So what we're looking at is, doubling the protected area system within several years, which is a very ambitious target, but we think it's not impossible. And Northern Ontario is really a key part of the work that has to happen, because we're not going to get to these targets with just small bits and pieces of Southern Ontario. It's going to take a lot of participation, consultation, and engagement with Northern communities. In other provincial news this year, last year, 2021, the Ontario Ministry of the Environment, Conservation and Parks announced a working group on protected areas in the spring. And along with an announcement of the creation of a new conservation reserve in Southern Ontario, we found this news to be really exciting because it's showing some interest by the Ontario government in expanding protected areas. We presented to a couple members of the working group, and we to this day don't quite know what's come out of these discussions, as their report and recommendations weren't made public. But the people that we presented to are strong environmental advocates, so we're hopeful that they'll put forward some of our ideas. On our end of things, this is where we reached out to the Friends of Wabakimi and our other nature network groups. We wanted to put together a collective vision of places that people want to see protected, and we did that by creating a story map that was launched at a webinar in May of 2021. The goal was really to open the public dialogue around protected areas, and we were really heartened to see over 500 people join us for that webinar, as well as receiving over 50 community nominated sites for the map. So if you haven't seen it already, this is the URL, the website link to check out the map. It's really fun to explore. You can zoom in and out and you can see photos and descriptions of each of the sites. As Vern mentioned, Friends of Wabakimi suggested a couple sites to us, and in Northern Ontario, we also got a lot of other submissions from local community groups, as well as some bigger areas that we know are of interest to Indigenous communities. And we're really thankful for everyone who took the time to submit sites to this map. So I hope you will check it out. Zooming in, Vern already showed similar maps, but just wanted to highlight the two areas again. The Survey Creek area is interesting because it's filling in gaps between Forest Stewardship Council candidate protected areas, which Julie will touch on. But this is, yeah, so these are the sites Shifting gears a little bit, part of our campaign has also been increasing Indigenous engagement and leading community workshops to discuss and answer questions on Indigenous protected and conserved areas, which is a form of protected and conserved area that is led by Indigenous communities, which we think is going to be vital to kind of the future of expanding Ontario's protected areas system. And we've been focused on continuing discussions on collaboration, co-management, and governance with Indigenous communities, both on our campaign to protect public lands as well as in our nature reserves program. And a big part of our work is also on educating the public, and we've been working hard to highlight efforts of Indigenous-led conservation and priorities from these communities. And a couple of examples are here. We published a blog on the concept of IPCAs, and recently this last word article in the On Nature magazine, which explains the term unceded lands. Julie's going to give an example now of a site in Northern Ontario.
Thanks, Jackie. Yeah, I mean, I want to talk about the Farthing Peninsula or Kachi site that some people may know about. To me, this is just one of those really special places in Northern Ontario, and it's special ecologically. There's over 90 species of breeding birds there. It's got a lot of mature bog forests, and just like a huge fisheries. But what's really special about it, well, there's two things. One is the local folks there have been working for 12 years to protect it, and it's just been incredible to get to work with them directly. And that's included the Eagle Lake First Nation, tourism operators, permanent residents, the commercial fishery there. And they've been fighting this fight for so long. And I know 12 years may not even seem that long, because I know other people have been fighting for the good fight for decades. But in this area in particular, like, two very interesting things happened over that 12-year period. One was it's the Dryden Forest Management Unit there, and the Dryden Forestry folks had planned on, you could see this red area here, and there's this little land bridge, like called the Isthmus, to enter it. And they had planned on getting access to it and logging it in the last 10-year plan in 2011. And as it happened with the local folks out there doing, research on birds and stuff, they found an eagle nest right on the isthmus, which prevented any roads from being built at the time. Like, it was because, the eagle nest boundaries are really small. It's only like a few hundred meters buffer, but it was enough to prevent any logging roads from going onto the peninsula. So they were able to stop logging for the next 10 years just based on that. And then fast forward to the more recent plan, and the tree where that eagle nest had been was dead. And there was a lot of suspicion locally about if someone had gone out there, and who knows what happened. But anyways, it was dead, and the eagles were no longer using it. But an archaeologist, the First Nation there, and some local folks went out and started doing archaeological digs. And they found several really important finds right on that isthmus again. So it's almost like there's something there in that area that does not want this peninsula to be logged. It's like just in the nick of time, when things needed to be found and to stop roads from going in there, they found it. And so last summer, I was able to go out there. They put up a placard at the isthmus, and you can only get there by boat. There are no roads. And had this 40 people came out there in boats and had this wonderful ceremony with elders and the chief of Eagle Lake, just to celebrate their achievement of not getting a login on there. So we've been working with them. We're going to continue working with them. The local people do want the area permanently protected, but at least for their interests anyways, there will be no logging in this next 10-year plan. So they have another 10 years to try and get it protected. Next slide, please, Jackie. The last couple of years for me personally, I've also done a lot of work on the FSC Canada protected areas. So hopefully most people are familiar with the Forest Stewardship Council. It's that FSC logo, like an eco logo. You see it on, I see it on a lot of junk mail. Actually, it's like on a lot of envelopes. It's on 2x4s and boxes. Big companies like Staples and Home Depot have buying, preferential buying for products that have the FSC symbol. And Ontario Nature staff, we worked for many years negotiating the new standard that came out. I think it was in the last 2 years that a new standard came out, which combined, there used to be 4 standards across Canada, combined them into one. And it was a lot of negotiation between the social chamber, which had union and First Nation representatives. The union representatives. There's an Indigenous chamber that had the Indigenous representatives, the economic chamber that had the companies, and the environmental chamber that had a lot of the ENGOs like Ontario Nature. And it was part of that standard we negotiated was that every FSC certified forest must permanently protect 10% of their forest management unit. So we did some analysis to see, well, which forest management units, like that 10% includes existing protected areas and then whatever they need to do to achieve the 10%. So we worked a lot with the companies to understand what areas they had already identified. And we did a really deep dive assessment on the conservation value of all these sites, because we wanted to make sure the sites were of good quality and not just a bunch of, leftover areas that nobody wanted. And we did that work with Birds Canada, and we did find that about 85% of the sites of this 1 million hectares collectively of FSC Canada protected areas were of pretty good conservation value based on species at risk, recreational values, old growth forest, depending where it was in the province and that sort of thing. FSC also requires free, prior, and informed consent from Indigenous communities. So part of that work that we've been doing is trying to have conversations. It's been really difficult during COVID, obviously, to get together face to face, but to work with Indigenous communities to make sure that their interests are acknowledged and accommodated as we move forward with that. But we have been promoting this opportunity as one big opportunity to the provincial government that already has one of the economic interests on side, and they do have conservation value. And I'm going to talk a little bit, I think in a few slides, about we've been also undertaking carbon storage assessments now on those sites to see how relevant they may be for nature-based climate solutions.
Thanks, Julie. The Farthing Peninsula is a great example of an Indigenous protected and conserved area, but there are many other examples in the province where Indigenous communities are trying to protect their territories. So it's all on the province now, basically, to move on all of these opportunities. So the maps on this slide show other opportunities on unceded Crown lands. We've got areas of natural and scientific interest and provincially significant wetlands, both of which are areas that have already been evaluated for various natural heritage or scientific and conservation values. And so along with provincial wildlife areas, which are mostly in Southern Ontario, these are all areas that currently don't qualify us for the national standard for protected and conserved areas, but are significant areas that Ontario should be permanently protecting. So just want to show these. Another area where we think there's a lot of opportunity to meet our protected areas targets is recognizing where municipalities and private lands are also contributing to biodiversity conservation. So one of our projects last year involved partnering with municipalities and conservation authorities to assess their conservation lands to see whether they would qualify as protected areas, which would help with recognizing sites where there are strong policies and management and monitoring practices that do meet the national standard and that we think other areas should as well. In On the private land side, one exciting piece of news from 2021 is that Ontario Nature submitted all 26 of our nature reserves to the Canadian database for protected and conserved areas, and all of them qualified as protected areas. And there's been interest from other land trusts too, and it's great seeing that privately conserved areas can be recognized as, conservation champions. And kind of going into 2022, we are in our campaign working with a lot of partners, including environmental organizations and others. And Julie, did you want to talk about Atlas 3?
Sure, I'll just mention if there may be people who are already involved in Atlas 3, it's a huge voluntary community citizen science endeavor over 5 years to collect breeding bird data. And if anyone is interested, we do have, there is an Atlas 3 bird website that has all the methods and how you conduct them and where you submit information. So if you're interested in that, you're welcome to email Jackie or I to find out more information, or you can look on the websites if you're interested in doing bird site surveys over the next couple of years.
Yeah, so this kind of last part of our presentation is changing gears a little bit. One of the paths, I guess, that our Protected Places campaign is veering towards right now is really connecting the issues of climate change and biodiversity loss together. We've identified various candidate sites around the province, and an important value is potentially assessing them for their climate values or their carbon storage and sequestration abilities, and looking at the concept of nature-based climate solutions in the province and seeing where management or restoration practices might be able to help us mitigate against climate change. So I'm going to let Julie talk a little bit more about it, but we put out a few blogs recently about nature-based climate solutions, and we also had a webinar in October of last year, and a recording is available on Ontario Nature's YouTube channel if people want to learn more.
Sure. So I just wanted to also let everyone know that we're this spring, starting March 1st, we're going to be running a carbon assessment series, online workshops. We had initially planned to have a conference in Thunder Bay, but decided over the holidays, as things were starting to take a turn for the worse, and we didn't know about gathering restrictions and all that we'd just do it online again this year, which is good in some ways because it means a lot more people can participate in the workshops. So what's sort of behind this work is that we know, when Jackie talked about the story map and all the sites across Ontario that many grassroots groups have brought forward of areas they'd like to see protected, we know that the carbon storage and sequestration, as well as climate change adaptation value for wildlife and plants and all that sort of stuff, is going to be becoming more prominent in the discussions about what we protect and set aside. So we are hoping, we really strengthened our team last summer to get a lot more technical people on staff so we could do some of these carbon assessments ourselves. And our intention is to figure out how to do them and then share them with grassroots groups. So hopefully grassroots groups can also start conducting, some assessments on areas that are of interest to them. We work so much with naturalists, so we have lots of bird data and lots of other species at risk data, lots of plant information, but trying to get more information on the sites about carbon storage and what in particular, what could be lost if those areas are developed versus what if they're protected. So anyways, the first one is going to be on March 1st. And I'm not sure what Jackie, did an invitation go out to Friends of Wabkimi or?
It went out to our nature network, but I just posted the registration link in the chat as well.
Yeah, so if anyone's interested, we're really trying to focus on grassroots organizations and local communities, not organizations like government or big NGOs or industry that have teams of GIS people already doing this sort of work. We're trying to focus on more like smaller organizations, lots of volunteer organizations to be able to do and engage this work. So they're focused on that. That's the audience. But if you want to participate, or if anyone in the Friends of Wapakimi want to, or if you know other groups that might want to do that, they're welcome to come and join that one. And we're going to kind of just start with some of the basics around carbon storage and sequestration assessments, and build into some like more technical sessions. But the first one's going to be more broad and just trying to understand what what people know about this and what they'd like to see and be able to do. And there may even be opportunities for Ontario Nature to do some of the work for groups, if that's where groups are at. But anyways, and yeah, we're going to be doing some field work this summer to validate some of our carbon models. And we're going to just try to align that with our breeding bird surveys, because we already have some teams of people going out to do stuff. So they'll be collecting soil and such when they're out doing the bird surveys. So I was just going to walk through some of the results for the 2 sites that Friends of Wapakimi put forward first, and just not dig in too much. If you're really interested in knowing more, it'd be best to come to the workshop, because we'll dig into the details here, because it can be a bit much if that's not your thing. But basically, we've been running 3 different models. Well, we've been running 2 models and then comparing that with the World Wildlife Fund and McMaster University just last year put out a national carbon map. So also testing it against that to try and see how much carbon are these areas potentially storing per hectare. And a big part of that has been, well, actually, I'm going to move, Jackie, I'm going to move to the next slide and just talk about things more generally. Yeah, so there's a couple things we're trying to get out of this right now. Like Ontario Nature is not at the moment in the, we don't have an interest in trying to sell carbon offsets or carbon credits or make money, like sell each ton of carbon or anything like that. We're really interested in 2 things. One is finding areas that store more carbon than the surrounding areas. And just from the preliminary analysis that our GIS person did, both the Missisquoi and the Survey Creek areas store more carbon than, well, I should just compare the Survey Creek with the Black Spruce Forest, because that's where it's located, but then the forest around it. So that's really interesting to start talking about, well, are some of these areas storing more carbon than the managed landscape around them, as another thing to contribute to a case for support for why they might be protected. So that's one part of it. The other thing is to work on some boundaries around these sites. If we have more information about the carbon storage, that might help us, know, should it be bigger, smaller, move east, west, that sort of thing, just to try and have as many values as possible, both like ecologically, recreationally, tourism, spiritual, carbon values together. It's always to make the strongest case for this site that it should be set aside. Yeah, I think that's probably it, Jackie. And I can answer some questions about that at the end if people want to dig in more.
Thanks, Julie. Yeah, we also want to reiterate, so these are pretty preliminary numbers. We are, just testing out the models ourselves. We aren't the research teams and technical people that are actually developing the models, but these models are based off of kind of land cover data and soil database. So it's pretty interesting to us just to be able to compare between sites and kind of explore Ontario in a different perspective. So
yeah, I'll just add to that, Jackie. And so these are the preliminary results, and we're going through a peer review process over the next couple of months. So we're hoping to refine and get to a place where we can publicly publish these results. But right now, they're still just sort of our internal discussions about the models.
Great. So, Julie.
Oh yeah, I'll just speak to this too about some of the next steps in our Protected Places campaign work we're doing. One is specifically to the FSC Canada sites, Canada protected areas, but it could apply to other sites as well eventually. And that is, we found, so through the FSC certification, the FSC certified companies need to be within their sphere of influence promoting the sites for permanent protection, because they don't make those decisions they can only voluntarily withdraw them from logging, but they're supposed to work with their sphere of influence. We've talked to a lot of the companies, and we are fundraising at the moment to hire someone to do a legal assessment of all the different tools available for permanent protection, because in some cases the Provincial Parks and Conservation Reserves Act may not be the best tool for getting permanent protection, but there are other tools under the Mining Act to withdraw them, and the Public Lands Act, and all sorts of things in Ontario. So we're doing an assessment of trying to get more people into that agreement about how to permanently protect them, and then be able to propose this to the provincial government to show that this isn't, not everything is necessarily going to be a park, because there are some places where people are not very receptive to parks, but they could be receptive to permanent protection under a different policy. There's a lot of alliteration there when we talk about parks piece. But the second thing is we are in the process of hiring an economist to do some economic cost benefit analysis on site. So really looking at, okay, yes, we know there are some industrial extraction values to some of the sites, but really carefully looking at, well, how valuable are they compared to a lot of the other values that protecting would give us, in terms of whether that's tourism, whether that's carbon, all those sorts of things. So again, both of these projects we're undertaking are to strengthen the case generally for more protection in the province, and trying to make it as easy as possible for the provincial government to move ahead.
Thanks, Julie. So one last kind of key piece for us in all of this Ontario work will really be determined by what happens this upcoming summer. There's going to be a provincial election in June, as I hope most of you are aware of, and it's really important to us to get protected areas and biodiversity out there as important election issues alongside climate change. Ontario Nature has sought meetings with the major political parties to kind of discuss our ideas and opportunities, as we presented to you tonight as well, and to get protected areas targets on everyone's radar, in collaboration as well with other environmental organizations. We also, want to acknowledge that we're in pretty challenging times, and part of it is bearing witness to some of the changes we've been seeing. In the last few years, we've been, instead of moving towards a lot of the protected areas targets, we've been seeing a lot of environmental deregulation on many fronts. And it's important to us to really emphasize that environmental issues are non-partisan issues, and it's kind of going to affect everyone. So coming up to the election, we'll probably have a couple of action alerts on our website, and hopefully some resources for local groups for you guys to use to engage your communities and your local candidates, some questions to ask them. So stay tuned for that. And I think as part of our discussion, it'd be really great to hear what folks like you might find helpful leading up to the election. And we really want to ask you to help us engage with your community leading up to June. So yeah, that brings us to the end of our presentation. Thanks so much for listening to us tonight. It was really great to, be able to talk with local communities about issues like this. And this is where you can find me. You can also find Julie by email to julieb@ontarionature.org. So yeah, thanks so much. And I hope you have time now to take some questions and have a bit of a discussion.
Absolutely. Go ahead, Julie.
Vern, just before we jump into that, I was just going to mention, we appreciate that a lot of Friends of Wabakimi members are U.S. citizens, so might not be involved in our election. But it's also just communicating about values and the importance of it across the membership. People who are residents in the province can be talking about this and sharing this with others.
Well, again, our membership's about 50-50, so you are hitting some Ontario residents. We definitely want to encourage people to have a conversation. If you want to send chat that Jackie and Julie could answer. So if you want to throw a question in by chat, that would be great. And while that people are typing rapidly, I'm gonna ask for you to add on. You talked about the forest easement, for the certification. Could you expand upon that a little bit more? Because I've heard that before, and I'm not sure I totally understand it, and I'm probably not even asking the question properly.
You mean with the FSC?
Yes,
work?
yes, please.
Yeah, so they have FSC certified forests, there's a standard that they have to meet. There's indicators and requirements under the standard that are audited every year. And in that, the companies they use all sorts of like environmental tools. There's different areas of concern, buffers and things like that, but they have to actually identify 10% of their management unit as for protection. And I saw in the chat someone asking about what protection means, so I'll just explain it anyway. So in that, it means that those areas, the priority is conservation in those areas. So occasionally, yes, there could be a road that's put through because it's needed for something, but generally it means no mining, no industrial logging, no hydro development, no residential development, no aggregate extraction. So really that sort of industrial and more like larger residential scale development is not permitted in a protected area. Whereas there are other conservation tools used in forestry. There are things like, timing of logging to protect breeding birds. That's not those those tools are important in forestry, but that's not what that's not what's meant by this protection.
Okay. And I don't want to belabor that, but I'd be really interested to see how much of that is being done in the units that are managed around the provincial park itself. And that's a whole nother side discussion. We've got a question coming in from, one of the first questions was, what can the U.S. citizens do to help? So why don't you hit that, and then we'll get Bruce's question.
Yeah, I've got one idea. So I think part of expanding protected areas is really showing the Ontario government the demand that's out there for protected and conserved areas. And a lot of these areas are valuable for conservation, but it's also very valuable for recreation and being a green space outside where people can go for their mental, physical, and spiritual health. And we've really been seeing in the last couple of years with our lockdowns and everything, the demand for protected areas and parks has skyrocketed, and we're seeing that our existing protected area system is not enough to meet that demand from people. And so we need the government basically to set aside more areas where they can properly manage for a lot of the foot traffic and kind of everything associated with recreation. And I think people who are Americans and visiting Ontario, like that, part of that demand is still, trying to communicate that you are supportive of this. And I think on the American side as well, I can't remember if I'm pretty sure President Biden has committed to the 25% by 2025 protected areas target. So it's exciting. This is happening in countries all around the world. Everyone is understanding that we need to increase our conserved areas in order to really protect from biodiversity loss and address climate.
Well, I'm assuming I can write a check to Ontario Nature, correct? You'll spend my US dollars if I send you the money?
Sure.
Absolutely. Julie, can you see the question that Bruce has asked? Are conservation reserves a good alternative? You want to hit that one?
Yeah, for sure, conservation reserves are a good alternative to parks. But the challenge we found was that the provincial parks and conservation reserves are under the same piece of legislation. So yes, conservation reserves are like the Farthing Peninsula, for example. The local people there want that to be a conservation reserve. We 100% support that. And just, one of the main differences with conservation reserves being that provincial parks are managed, there tends not always, but there tends to be more recreation and such there, where the conservation reserves often allow hunting and fishing and focus on some of those recreational activities. So sometimes local folks are more receptive to those areas if they're concerned that a park is going to shut out certain uses. But we found in working through this, even that is still challenging for some because it's under the Provincial Parks and Conservation Reserves Act, and looking for other tools of ways to protect the area. And a really specific example is right now the companies are voluntarily setting them aside from logging, but mining is still completely permitted in those areas. And if a road goes in for mining and any significant research and staking and exploration is done in the area, it could damage let alone a mine, but that's fairly unusual, but it could damage the ecological values there. So for example, we'd like to see the Mining Act, the withdrawal tools in the Mining Act would be one way of pulling that out. And also, Bruce, with CLUPA and the Public Lands Act, whether there's tools in there too that could just set them aside, while these other consultation processes and stuff are going on.
The next question is, do you work with city spaces? I'm assuming you do, but obviously expand upon that.
Yeah, so I've mostly worked in collaborations with cities in Southern Ontario, so I'm not as familiar with Central and Northern Ontario. But one of the other sides that I talked about, this one, is working with cities and municipalities to get their areas assessed and qualified, hopefully for the Canadian database as well. So part of it is recognizing where some municipalities already have strong policies, and in other cases, it's identifying where those gaps are and really encouraging municipalities to kind of up their conservation game in terms of management and monitoring in order for them to qualify. So there are opportunities for sure. There's a lot of municipalities that are getting into opportunities like tree planting and restoration, and all of those are really beneficial. So if your local municipality is looking into kind of conservation and climate action activities, those are really awesome to support.
Julie, can you see the next question there? Talking about carbon capture, do you want to try and grab that one and run with it, or Jackie, whoever is best qualified?
I could start, and then Jackie, if there's anything else you just want to add to it. Yeah, first of all, I want to say, our organization, biodiversity is our foremost, our skill set. So definitely when we've been assessing these areas, we tend to really focus on species at risk and wildlife, because we're a wild species, wild spaces organization. That's most of our staff have some sort of background in wildlife. So carbon's been a pretty new thing, but we realize it's an important thing to talk about. And that's why we brought some new people onto our team to help us with that. So far we've only done the carbon storage. So the carbon that's already sequestered in the landscape assessment so far. And that's partly because it's easier to analyze, because a lot of it's in the soil, most of it's in the soil. And if you have some decent, soil mapping, you can start figuring out where are areas of high carbon storage. But our next step is to start analyzing carbon sequestration with some of the more complexities around that. That's where we're heading next, for sure. I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that, Jackie.
No, I think we're good on that. Yeah.
Well, I'm getting thank yous, and that's a good thing. Why don't you, if you guys want to, is there something else that you, a side topic or something you'd want to expand upon a little bit more? We've got a few more minutes, so feel free to continue your discussion. Or Julie, she's got that look on her face. What do you want me to say, Vern?
It's Sunday night. It's always a little bit of a low time.
I get it. I get
easy
it.
down. It's not the most intellectually, stimulated time of day. But yeah, I was just going to mention with Vern and Dave, we're meeting in February. We're going to talk about some more sites. And I think it would be great if anyone in the Friends of Wabakimi, like, we're trying to build the cases for these areas about why they are special and why they should be considered for protection. So definitely other areas or more information on areas we already have on our story map, because there's a lot of different spaces that people may have been to, gone on a canoe trip, done some naturalist stuff, or spent some time. We're definitely interested to learn more and accumulate as much as we can. So I'll just put that out there. And if you get a chance to look at our story map, there might be other sites where you think, yeah, I've got something on that, I got some photos or whatever. And if people could share them, we'd really appreciate it.
Something else
Go.
Yeah, something else I wanted to emphasize is that it's really going to take all of us to move these sites to permanent protection. And as like the group of people that are very familiar with the Wabakimi area, it'd be very helpful for us if you reach out to your local member of provincial parliament to really advocate for your sites and ideas. We are trying to advocate kind of on a provincial level, really, with all of these sites, but it takes the local community really stepping up and showing that this is what they want for this to happen. One example right now is the government announced a new conservation reserve in Prince Edward County, and that took many years of the local community really advocating for it. So yeah, it's really great if you guys could kind of get engaged around that and share your vision of this region with the decision makers.
The next question up is, does it help if it's a World Heritage Site? I assume that it does.
Yeah, so this particular site, the Pimachuo and Aki site, I think that's the site, the Ontario-Manitoba border World Heritage Site. But I just say it does and it doesn't, in the sense that World Heritage Sites don't necessarily meet the standard of protection required to meet the IHE targets, because it depends on how the lands are classified and whether they're like they're protected or not, because World Heritage Sites also protect other sorts of things where there's lots of developments and stuff, and biodiversity is not first. But my understanding is that area, though, it could contribute quite a bit, because I do think there are parts of it that are meant to be set aside from industrial development within that World Heritage Sites. So it could, but I think it's still evolving, in that process of regulation and stuff.
You've got another compliment here, and I would echo this, that you punch above your weight. You play a huge role in protecting Wabakimi, and send you the money. So back to that first question, how can we help if you're south of the border? Well, we can write you a check, and you'll spend it wisely, I'm sure. Feel free to add to that comment.
Yeah, I would. Thanks, Bruce. I agree, and I was just going to say too, like, we are just, our Thunder Bay office, for example, we are expanding now to 4 people as we're hopefully coming out of some of this COVID fog and being able to start up some of our programs again. And one of them is going to include hiring a nature-based tourism coordinator. So that's another thing with folks at Friends of Wabakimi. We're going to be working with some local tourism operators on bringing some more nature-based education when appropriate and when we can, and hoping to support them as well. So anyways, it's growing. So we definitely appreciate the compliments and appreciate any support, because we had kind of scaled back a bit during COVID, without offices and without people. All our people are usually out in the field doing things. And now we're getting ready for like a period of expansion again. So it's pretty exciting.
Your thoughts on engaging First Nation communities? We feel there needs to be more of this, but how? What's the best way?
Do you want to field that, Jackie, or do you want me to?
I can start, and you can kind of talk more about your experiences. So in general, we're hearing that First Nations communities, really want to take a bigger role in, I guess, being included in conversations around their territory and environmental projects of all kinds. And it's hard to answer this question because each community is so different, and individual communities have different issues and priorities. But one thing is really to start building relationships when you can, starting early, trying to get to know what their priorities are and seeing if your skill set might be of help to them. A lot of them are struggling with capacity on engaging on a lot of environmental consultations and issues. So if people with expertise want to offer that, sometimes that is appreciated. But it's hard to be more specific because it's so individual. But on the protected areas front, at least, we feel that permanent protection and conservation, these issues or these areas, can't really be protected without the consent and consultation with the First Nations in the area.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, so Ontario Nature over the last 3 or 4 years, we've before lockdowns and stuff, we hosted a number of cross-cultural gatherings with Indigenous communities, leaders, activists, and non-Indigenous communities, leaders, and activists. And they're very well attended, usually over 100 people, lots of great speakers, and trying to navigate, these spaces of how we can support each other and our interests around conservation specifically. And those reports, the reports from those sessions and the videos from those sessions are available through our website. So there are things to glean from that. And I just to see the experience and how the conversations have proceeded and who we're working with. I'd also just say on the Breeding Bird Atlas, I sit on an Indigenous engagement committee with the Breeding Bird Atlas. So last year we developed in partnership with some, like in one case with an Indigenous scholar, about working with Indigenous peoples on research and some, information on how engagement should take place, land acknowledgements, all that sort of stuff. And that's on the Atlas 3 website, and also in there you can see the kinds of tools that the Atlas 3 website set up for engagement, which may not fit specifically for Friends of Wabkimi, but there may be things that you could see on there and say, oh, I can adapt that to my situation. So that's just another resource for sure that's online that has actually sort of practical tools. And then on the Ontario Nature website, there's more sort of philosophical conversations about how to move forward.
How does Ontario Nature relate to the Nature Conservancy? What's your relationship? How do the two organizations work?
I guess some very quick history. So Ontario Nature used to be the Federation of Ontario Naturalists. We were established in 1931, so it's been 90 years now. And the Nature Conservancy of Canada, NCC, I believe was formed as it was created by some FON members. And so I think we've had a pretty good, close relationship with them. Their focus is definitely, as a land trust, on private land conservation. And yeah, so I think we've had a pretty good relationship with them. And also don't want to confuse with the Nature Conservancy that is based in the US with the same name, but the one in Canada is NCC.
Okay. I think actually the Nature Conservancy now in Canada is called Nature United too. So it's all this evolution of the groups, but yeah, we definitely work with them, on lots of projects over the years, but we aren't officially related in any way.
Well, okay. See if I can answer this question without putting anybody in hot water. Conservation should not be a political issue, but at least here on the south side of the border, it is. Can you speak to how that plays out in Canada? If you want to try and answer that question, or is that a little too loaded for you to deal with?
Well, I mean,
feel free to wave it off if you're not comfortable.
Well, I would just say we've gone through a period in Ontario anyways, where the economy has been in the forefront politically. And now it probably will be for a while, because we have to all try to recover from COVID and the struggles that businesses have faced and stuff through this. So I would just say not specific to any political like wing or anything like that, but it's when you're focused on the economy, sometimes it's hard to have the environment come to the, even in the top three, because even after the economy, you've got health and education, and environment can get pushed down no matter what the political stripes are of the party. So, but anyways, right now we definitely, in Ontario, I think the focus is going to be on the economy, and so we have to try to speak that language, I think, when we're talking about conservation, because there are economic values. There are certainly health values to protected areas. So, figuring out how to have those discussions in a way where we're on the same page is important, no matter what the political stripes are of the people you're talking to.
I also wanted to add, like, the environmental history of both Ontario, Canada, and the United States is very interesting, because no matter like which side of the spectrum, parties and stuff have in the past supported various environmental issues, depending on the values that it speaks to, right? Like wildlife, clean water, clean air. There were times in the last even 50 years where both sides of the spectrum are able to agree on certain things. So it's a lot of, negotiation and trying to find solutions really that speak to everyone's values. And yeah, we definitely think that environmental issues are kind of the big, I guess, crises of our time. And it's something that it'll take everyone to solve.
Well, late. Go ahead.
I just saw that Brent clarified the whole nature. So the Nature United is actually the Canadian branch of the Nature Conservancy. And then there's the Nature Conservancy of Canada. So thanks for clearing that up, Brent. It can get a little fuzzy with those names.
Well, we're coming up on the hour. We really appreciate where you've been. I would hope that maybe a year from now we can invite you to come back and give us some updates on some of these projects, and hopefully some of our cooperative efforts. And as you indicated, if you've got information on some of these areas, please be willing to share that. And I would also hope that we'd be willing to make a donation to support this fine organization. So I'm going to give you the last word here if you want to kind of bring closure to your discussion. So either one of you or both, if you want to just kind of bring your final thoughts to the discussion. And then, and again, we appreciate very much you being with us tonight.
I guess my final thoughts are that if you aren't already on Ontario Nature's email lists or following our blog and reading our magazine, we have tons of resources and lots of articles that you might find interesting about conservation topics of all kinds. And we have lots of programs, from education to nature reserves to protected areas and policy. So there's lots of things that you can support, and we really appreciate everyone's time.
Yeah, I'll just say thank you as well. And at Ontario Nature, we do a lot of our work is at the grassroots level with local groups, and we couldn't do what we do unless there were people all over the province who are voluntarily, doing a lot of heavy lifting on conservation. So I just want to thank you guys for what you're doing, and we're looking forward to seeing, what we might be able to do around sort of the Wabakimi and the watersheds there.
Look forward to the partnership. We're going to thank everybody tonight. Hopefully we will have this information posted at a later date, working with Dave. Dave, you have any last second thoughts you want to add to this discussion? I know you put a couple things in writing.
We have a conservation committee, and we need to have a meeting. And so if folks are interested, edit your membership profile to include that, or send us an email at info@wabakimi.org. So we need to keep our focus on these conservation issues as well as our paddling. So we all want to go paddle, but we want to have a boreal forest that's intact. We want to see caribou. We want to see moose. We want to see all those birds that we're tracking. So.
Thank you all. Thank you all. We'll,
Thank you.
and with that, we'll call it a do and let Jackie and Julie go have the rest of their evening off.